Now let's start for real. It's 4 half, whatever is the time on your clock, wherever you are. We're really glad to have you all today, and we're really happy that you joined. My name is Blondine Jux. I'm part of the People's Congress. It's a social movement in Colombia. We had the privilege and the pleasure to meet the crew of Climaximo a few years ago, a few months ago, and we were invited to help with the launch of this book. And because we think, as maybe many of you, that it's actually a great book to debate about, we said yes. So here we are. Just to make sure if people need, there's interpretation. Hay interpretación abajo de su pantalla. Il y a de l'interprétation en bas de votre écran. So without further ado, let's start. Today, we're launching that incredible book, All In. The good news is, I was told that there's actually a double sense to that all in. I thought the main issue was like, oh, we're all together. But then I understood that it was also the all in, like let's bet on what's going on. So I'm going to invite you all to roll the dice with us today and see how we can use that launch as an opportunity to debate. So our authors that I'm going to present in a second decided to give us a strong statement. First, they're saying that capitalism is the root cause of climate change and that there's no way it's going to fix it. So then they say we need to dismantle capitalism. Easy task, right? We should do that within 5 or 7 years. It's going to be something really quick, really fast. It's going to be almost easy. So that's what they do in that book, right? They invite us to that question about how we're going to get rid of capitalism as soon as possible. But I have to say that since we have a few years of difference in our age with the others, the first time I heard them telling me that, I was like, so basically, you're telling that whatever we've been doing before was not enough. Whatever revolutionary leftist activist or however we call ourselves, we've been doing, even for a century or more, was just not enough. And the other question, it's like, how close are we from the possibility of making a clean slate of the past to change the world's foundation as reason thunders in its crater? Urgent question for more than a century. And this is the question that we're asked to ask ourselves, and not just to ask ourselves, but to answer. This is the big issue and the big challenge that that book posed. Most of us here, we're part of organizations, collectives, movements that do actually care about climate change, that do actually care about how to fix the world, how to make the world a better place, how to make sure each other mobilization actually has an impact. Most of us organize mobilization almost every day. Most of us have press release, mobilization campaign. We do alliance with others. We debate. We organize popular assemblies. We do many things. Sometimes we even burn out on the way. But we do all those things because we care. But basically, what we're asked to do is to be like, if we care, we actually need to ask ourselves if we're doing it right, or what could we do about it. One of the possible theses of what we're doing wrong is that we add environmental issue as something added on a long list of demands, instead of putting it at the core of what is class struggle today. So this is maybe also the invitation of that book and on a few books that have been around lately. Maybe a difference with that book and others is that with this one is actually asking us to act right now. And I'm really sorry for the spoiler, but if you haven't read it yet, I really hope you're going to do it soon. But there's actually an extra chapter to that book, a chapter that is unwritten, and a chapter that we were invited to write together. And it's actually one of the things we're going to be talking about um, today. So basically, what we say and why are we concerned? It's because if we're talking about impoverishment, food crisis, neo-fascism, fascism, the latest Trump craziness on Twitter, X, or whatever those things. If we're talking about, uh, work, workers, women's right, trans right, all of our rights, we're basically talking about one same thing. And that one same thing is the contradiction between capital and life itself. That ongoing contradiction between work and capital that try to basically get rid of our freedom, get rid of our own right to life. When I hold the book in my hands, the first thing I like to do is to check the index. I'm not going to read you all the index. I'm not going to do that. But I'm just going to give you, for the ones that haven't read it yet, uh, a few of the titles that I think are quite inspiring. It's starting at page 100. So, I skipped the first part. Sorry, I'll let you complete if you want to mention them. But I especially like one of the title, which is Taking Responsibility. And the subtitle is Faking Responsibility. The next one is Faking Deeper. And then Transference, Distraction, Conformism, and Failure. So that's the part in which the book actually kicks you in your face and puts you down and tell you that what you've been doing has been failing. But then they actually invite you to get up and pick up the fight. And that's when the next title is actually Planning for Victory, starting the starting point, planning for the future, and implementation. So basically, what this book invites us to do is to get kicked in our face and then get up and pick up the fight. I'm just going to share some of the amazing quotes and reviews from some of the people that might be here today before introducing our great authors. So, for example, Ana Bena Lemos, leader and defender against extractive mega projects in Mozambique, says this book shows the importance and strength of unifying our struggles, going beyond focusing only on our campaigns, and being in solidarity with the struggles of others. This is the way to build people power. As this book reveals, if you read this book, you need to start organizing. If not, you must read again. We all must stop being part of the problem and let's be part of the solution. I'll follow with Andrew Boyd, Chief Existential Officer at Climate Clock. If Rosa Luxemburg was correct, and it's either socialism or barbarism, and Naomi Klein, that capitalism is the root cause of the climate crisis, then the authors of All In ask the next logical question. How do we overthrow capitalism in time to preserve a livable planet? So without further ado, I'll introduce our great authors. So we have Mariana Rodrigues, who's born in Portugal. She's an organizer and trainer for social movement with experience in international network. Since 2019, Mariana organized dozens of direct actions, mass actions with the climate justice movement in Europe and at the global level. She also maybe burned out a few times and learned from that and decided to go on and pick up the fight. We also have Sinan Eden, who's an organizer and trainer with a strong taste for theory and for dialectics. So please let's keep it up. Uh, he has been involved in the student movement in Turkey, anti-austerity movement in Portugal, and the climate movement in both countries since 2007. He participated in NGOs, in Orthodox Marxist political parties and unorthodox Marxist political parties, in grassroots collectives, and anarchist groups. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Mariana to start with the first question we actually need to answer today. What is the book about? And why have you took the time to write it?
So hi, I'm really glad to see all the faces here. Some people that I also have been around with me in the last years. And actually, the argument of the book was already in the air, so it was not something that um, does come from me and Sinan, but it's based in the international work that we have been doing, not just the two of us, but several other comrades and collectively in Clip Maximo. And I think like all of us have been struggling to hold the connection with the climate crisis. So we sometimes we have a brief moment where we connect to the climate crisis in itself, but it's really easy to slip it away. And part of the book and part of the objective for us to write this book is actually to understand how we can connect with the climate crisis in a level that we are able to navigate it on that connection and being and understanding what to do with it. And I'm not talking, when I'm saying this, I'm not talking just about the climate activists or about the climate movement. I'm talking about all of us. And picking up maybe a little bit what you said, Blendin, before, the fact is that like we have to face that our strategies, our organizations, our conversations in the conference that we are going, our tactics, they are disconnected. They are set to failure because they are set for a different context and a different task. So knowing that and navigating in the conversations, in the coordination spaces that we have been present, that we have created in the last years, we realized that we kind of needed to put in the same place all the conversations that we were having in really separated moments. So the book is a little bit that, right? It's putting all together several of debates and conversations and giving a clarity around that. We know, as you said it, that, and when I say we, I'm saying the people in this room, but also like in general, all the organizers and the progressive movements, that capitalism system is the root cause of the climate crisis and has no perspective to solve it. And at the same time, we also know that the climate crisis gives a clear deadline for barbarism. So it's not about numbers in itself, but we know that nature in itself has boundaries, and we need to respect that boundaries. And when we go beyond that, that it will be impossible to stop barbarism. So we kind of have a deadline, and that is when we understand that the capitalism system is the root cause and that we have this urgency, then the logical conclusion is that we need to dismantle capitalism in the short term. So the questions of our time is, what is a theory of change that can hold both of these set of information, and what is the organizational model that delivers that theory of change? So this is the question that we wanted to answer with this book, and this is what we were working around. So the book is not about climate crisis. We are not talking about, what is climate crisis in itself. It's not, it's about the fact that, well, for all the fight that we are doing, we have a delivery deadline. So we need to understand how to deliver all the fight that we are doing in this deadline. The book is also not like an academical book. We use a lot of tools from the academic world, but we apply them for the context nowadays and understand how we can play with them. And we also don't pretend to give all the answers for everything, right? And as you said, the book, we still have to write it together, what we need to do. So it's not the final book. What we actually want is to be able to stop climate and social collapse. So in that sense, we need to understand how we are able to dismantle capitalism in the short term and what is the path that we have. So that's what we wanted to do with this tool, is to give that tool to the movement. Because what is happening, and I see that a lot, is that we are not having a theory of change that deliver the post-capitalism society that we want. So we're not putting in our strategy and in our work how we are going to deliver that in our lifetime. And we need to talk on those terms. So that's a lot of the conversations that I had in the last years, is like, how can we get out of the feeling of feeling defeat and the feeling of burnout and the feeling of depression that happens when you don't have a theory of change compatible with the task that that you know that you need to do. So we hope that the book gives you that tool and gives you that path for us to work together. Um, we started by looking to the story so far. So what we can learn about the revolutionary fights from the past, how they won, why they won, how they perceive that the society changed, and learning from that, learning from those examples, we come to the present and understand through different kinds of tools how we can deliver this task, looking at the fact that we are talking about a global issue and a class issue with a feminist perspective. Um, so in the main part of the book, the main part of the book is actually to aim to respond to these questions, right? So knowing what we know, what is our plan, how can we execute system change in this decade, and what are our week's deliverable to make that happen, and what kind of global movement do we need to have in the next years that can undertake this task, and how can we take the responsibilities in our own hands and stop being distracted by other ways of, like by the society and capitalism in itself and so on. So we hope that this can be, that you find some insights on the book, and that we are not aiming to be right, right? So we don't, this is not the final answer somehow, and it will be awesome if you already agree with 90% of what is on the book in that sense, and that we can work together around that, and that the tools that we are sharing actually allow us to build a movement for rupture that are able to have a diversity in the strategies and the capabilities, and that we can have a global movement ecosystem. So that's the main part of the book. And it's actually, for me, it's a really honest conversation about what we are doing. And in the end, we try to end it with a to-do list, almost. So it's almost a to-do list of a map, that it gives you the map, but it doesn't give you, like you still have to navigate that map. And we still need to navigate that map together, not just you, right? It's all of us together in that sense. So we know that this task that we are talking, it's really frightening and huge, but we are sure that this is what we need to do currently, and that we have that boldness to do it, and that we need to be honest with each other about taking our hands and walk this path together. So we hope that you will grab our hands and that you will dare to win with us.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariana, for getting us through the book like that. I really like the part in which we go for a victory, right? I really hope you don't get disappointed if we don't make it by 2030, but I still think it's a great thing to go for a victory, right? To get rid of that spirit of defeat and despair, which is basically what we're invited, right? To live through and to carry, basically, which is maybe heavier to carry than the task to changing it all. But I still have a huge question, and that question is for Sinan. Like, how are we gonna do this? Like, you've been talking about the tools, you've been talking about pathways. So you get the hard part of a job today to let us know what to do with that. And after that, I'm just gonna give a heads up to people that we're gonna enter first part of the Q&A. So if you want to prepare your questions, if you want to put them in the chat, please feel free to do so. But now, Sinan, please enlighten us. How are we gonna do that?
Yeah. Um, so I think I want to, so maybe there are a few things that I will say, and of course, some of them will be kind of rephrasing of what Mariana said, but we're talking about a short book. The content of the book is 150 pages overall, with images included. And it has, as Blandine was mentioning, there's a website and there's additional content that is already coming up on the website, and we keep on posting there. So there's this part of like actually embarking to do the stuff that that is a collective process. So it's not just two authors that wrote this book, but more generally. And the book itself has, I would say, one third of it is like status update. So those would be like situating ourselves and starting like where are we at and what are we trying to address. And one third is the actual chunk of like, okay, how do we get out of here? And then the other chunk, the last third would be what to do now? What are we going to do with it? So this is how it is organized. So the main chunk, the middle, which is what we think we kind of compiled from the air, that we harvested from what we were hearing. Those are the parts. So that is the second thing I want to say, is that the book is designed into propositions. And that, I think, it already gives a sense of how we're approaching this, right? Because so the propositions, they are kind of coming through a dialectical process of like, okay, so if this is the problem, as Mariana was saying, so how did people answer to problems of this kind? And then, okay, but then what is our context? How is our context different from these contexts? And that kind of builds up, and each proposition and each unfolding of the proposition will give you the question for the next one. So this is how it unfolds. Like we're actually having a kind of a conversation as we go along. And we so the main statement that we're doing in those propositions, that is kind of overarching it, is that we're seeing the movement ecology, or ecology of social movements, as an organizational tool, as it stands. So looking at all this complexity and contingencies and tensions, but also unity, seeing all of that as an intentional space and not just some sort of descriptive space, right? So this is our starting point, more or less. Or this is, I would say, the overarching statement around the book. So this is another thing I wanted to say. And finally, I think one thing we want to do with the book is that it's really propositional. So it's really like proposition one, proposition two, it moves on like that. And there's an answer. So we don't shy away. There's an answer. The answer is complex, but it's a bit, I think we want to do something that is not being done since the defeatism of neoliberal frameworks, is so we complexity or pluralism, let's say, complexity or pluralism they exist, they are real, they are necessary, but we sometimes tend to use them as escapism, right? As in, this is complex, but it's not like, so then what, right? Or there's a plurality of, or there is a diversity, but then what do I do with that, right? So these are kind of escapism from, as Blandine was mentioning, like there's a part of like taking responsibility of all of this shit. So we treat complexity and pluralism as a quality of the answer. It's embedded in the answer, rather than saying that it exists elsewhere outside of us. So that is another thing that we're doing. So the to-do list, the implementation part, the website, all of that includes that kind of complexity within it. So I think the book gives an actual pathway, and it itself tries to contain all the diversity that we want to have, that we want to include in our movements. So I think this is what I wanted to share for now.
Great. Thank you, Sinan. So as I was saying, the idea is like to have a dialogue. So we're gonna start with Q&A to make sure we can, let the thing go around. I have a huge amount of question if you don't show up with questions. So please don't freeze. Then I know by seeing your name there that a few of you actually have written amazing quotes and reviews of the book. But also we have a first question that I'm going to read in the chat. And because I'm also an interpreter in the rest of my life, I'm going to take a few seconds making time so that they can see the question while I read it. So the question from Tobias Brown is, if capitalism is the root cause of a polycrisis, do either of the authors have any thoughts on what economic system we need to transition to? Will it be a bastardized form of capitalism or something completely different? So this is our first question. Also, if you want to raise your hand to open your mics and be able to share your question, you can. If you'd rather do it in the chat, please do. and be aware. If not, I might give the floor surprisingly to a few of you. But maybe we can start with that question of, okay, so if not capitalism, what? The personal answers are allowed. Sinan, Mariana.
I think there's a part of there's a part of the question that is kind of anti-dialectic for me. It's not supposed to be answerable, right? The whole idea is that it's going to be constructed together. And I think that I'm gonna give two answers that are both deviations from the question. So one of them is when you look at the seed, and you look at the seed, you may have some idea of what that plant is, but you definitely know it's not an animal. So there's a part of it which is really like we don't know, and as it grows, we will discover. And of course, in this case, I'm giving an object, so it's not just an object that is growing on our own, but it's going to be just actual us. You know, it's the word like free association of producers or whatever you want to call it. Like we will come together and discover what it is, and we have the fortune of having 200 years of anti-capitalist, specifically anti-capitalist experience of trials and errors that we can learn from. Yet there's another answer. So this is one kind of deviation, which is I'm not saying what it is. I'm just saying like obviously. So when we define capitalism as like private property of means of production. So at least at that level, we have to agree. But then there's another aspect which so the other day we were talking with Mariana which is that if you're in a truck and the truck is like kind of going backwards on a slope, like completely lost control. You lost control of the truck and it's going backwards on a slope. So if you know how this works, there are certain things you cannot do. So one of them is at that point, you cannot say, but after we stop, where are we trying to go and what is the path to get there? That question is not relevant for your situation. The situation requires typically to adjust the speed with the gears and then have the handbrake and then change the gear front and then move, right? So there's a sequence of steps that are allowing moving forward somehow, right? So at this point of the climate crisis, it's really the handbrake situation that we have to adjust. And at this point, we really have to understand what is in the back and what we're trying to avoid and have an agreement that we have to avoid that. And I think from then on, we will together decide where we want to go forward. So as again, like there's long history of varieties of eco-socialisms, what's it called, half planet socialisms, a bunch of stuff that are recent and a bunch of stuff that are from the last century that we can tap on to learn like what are we going to do. But I think the answer is going to be built together through the movement, right? So it's going to be very hard to come up with recipes. And this is my reaction. It's not an answer. It's kind of my reaction to the question.
Mariana, there's two other questions that actually go in the same direction. So before letting you the floor, I'm going to read those two questions as slow as possible for the reason I said before. Uh, if you think there's a deadline, don't you believe we've already passed it? Which doesn't mean we shouldn't continue fighting. It just might change your strategy, right? So one of the big issue here is like, are we too late? Should we think about how to manage the disaster more than avoiding it? And then when do you say the book is engaging with strategy, organization, using theory, analysis, and emotion simultaneously, which is a quote from the book, actually, what do you mean by emotion here? Did you work out on a specific emotion you want to trigger? Because fear and emergency is not mobilizing. So what could be mobilizing? And then the last one I wanted to read in that batch because I think it relates directly to the first one is like if a book talk about organizing the movement as a party in order to make a high level strategy verification and coordination possible, to what extent are you proposing a sort of eco-Leninism, with that idea of the party in the center. So we have the organizing question, the emotions, and the deadline. So Mariana, please have fun with that.
All right. Um, well, I I hadn't had the chance to read the Overshoot book from Mom, but I was talking with Sinan the other day about that book, and he was saying like that some like a lot of years ago there was like news going out saying 2 degrees Celsius is that, and then like like that was a narrative, and then that narrative stops, and then it comes back again. So it's that kind of like phrasing that we are now seeing that 1.5 is dead, the 2 degrees are dead. It's from a certain assumption, right? And I do believe that inside of capitalism currently, it's completely dead 1.5, or like like the deadlines that we have in that sense. I think the difference is that it's not. It's still possible to. So the deadlines that we have, we haven't passed them. Like so, it's still possible to do what is necessary. Like it's still possible for us to keep above the boundaries that the nature gives us. Is just not possible inside of capitalism. But that doesn't mean that it's not possible. So it's technically possible. It's socially possible in the sense that we are able to do it. It's not possible inside of the system that we have nowadays. So I guess it's a little bit about what are the assumptions behind that shapes if you feel like there is no way to do it or not. That's a little bit to answer, like more the practical part of like the deadlines in itself. Um, and saying this, I'm not saying, I was also talking with Lundin before, like the fact that we need to organize ourselves and understand how can we be in a society where some resources are not going to be, like we're not going to have a huge amount of resources.
So for some reason, I lost the sound. Uh, but it seems it's not just me. So maybe we can. I think it was a connection issue for Mariana. So as soon as you can, as soon as you can fix it, let's try to get you back on for that part. Uh, I also wanted to add something on that. That taking responsibility and that and that and that those questions about which kind of which kind of system do you want? So I'm not bound by the others there, but I think it's quite interesting because usually they try to tell us that we have a responsibility for climate change just because we're human beings and basically we drink water and we poop and we use plastics and we have contradictions in our individual everyday life. But I think it's interesting to actually take responsibility because if we consider ourselves like revolutionary, if we consider ourselves like from a class that want to organize to change things, then this is the responsibility I actually take, right? Away from the kind of responsibilities we're supposed to take from the mainstream perspective. So I'm gonna say, is Mariana back? Are you back with us?
Am I
Or
back? Can
yes,
you
you're
listen to me?
back. Amazing. So
Yes?
let's
Awesome.
go on with you.
Thank you, Lundin. So maybe to jump to the other question that was made, in terms of like, does urgency mobilize people or not? I guess well, maybe I'm not giving a good answer. In Portuguese, I will say depends. So depends, because it really depends of like who are you mobilizing and like and how you want to mobilize. I think like for me, the important part, it's not, and what we are saying in the book, it's not we need to mobilize through urgency, and that's the only way. But it's about the strategy that you have, the plan that you have needs to be built on this context. So you need to know that the strategy that you have to overcome capitalism, the strategy that you have, like to mobilize all the society, all the workers and so on, or who you are organizing and who are you mobilizing, need to be compatible with the time frame that we have. And that can mean that you're going to use urgency in the conversation, or it can mean that you're going to use other ways to do that. I think in the end, how you're going to mobilize, or like the society, the people, it really depends on the context. But for me, it's about what is the deadline that you have in your strategy, because most of the organizers that I know are planning for for the future generations to do the revolution, and it's not during my generation that the revolution is going to happen. So the plans that are compatible to that, like what is your strategy, change completely. So I think it's more about that, the urgency part, than specifically how you're going to communicate with society. That will depend a lot, of the public you're aiming and so on. So I will make that difference in that sense. I'm not saying that does not mobilize. I'm just saying that like in certain situations it does. In other situations you might want to use another perspective. Go for it, as long as the strategy it's with the time frame, the correct time frame, and it's not like eventually in 20 years we'll arrive to a place that will enable us to be a little bit closer to the system change. That usually is that, right? So I will say that. And I guess like there was a last question, but I don't know if it's Sinan one wants to pick up that one, because I already forgot. With the sounds problem, sorry.
The one about the party, right? So yeah, as you feel, Sinan, if you wanna take up so are you proposing eco-Leninism would be the the question.
So that's a bit of a we come even myself, which is very strange because I'm already we come from a generation that is kind of unwedded to historical theoretical discussions in the left in general, in the sense of like we're not really invested in any particular branch or current in the theoretical discussions, which kind of puts us in a situation where we're like we can actually learn from everybody. And the book, like there's a chunk of the book where we are just going over all kinds of experiments that left tried to do. Lenin is there, a lot of other people are there, and we were just like very curious about all of them because none of them shares our context. So it's not exactly like take and apply, but we can learn stuff. And sometimes this is positive learning, and sometimes it's positive learning as in they did it, it worked, we have to learn how to do this. And sometimes it's negative learning as in they did it, it didn't work. Maybe they were even aware of it, but like how can we not repeat the same mistakes, right? So there's a part of it which is really, I'm not sure what Leninism is in that sense. In a very specific way, I would say that the way we are approaching the ecology stuff, the ecology of social movements stuff, so treating it as an ecological entity, having ecological thinking about it, nothing to do with the environment, right? Just having an understanding, ecosystem and understanding. I would expect that sometimes a vanguard element will be essential for victory. Many times, a vanguard element will be a very necessary element within a larger framework. And also in some other cases, that's not going to be how anything will be framed. Nobody will talk in that way. So I'm not really sure that it kind of includes or excludes, or kind of if you could equate it. But there is a part of Leninism for me, like what I learned directly from reading Lenin, which I think we will need, is responsiveness. And I think that if that is kind of part of Leninism or eco-Leninism or whatever you want to call it, I don't care. Because, I mean, it's not just Lenin, but he's very specific about it. And because he wrote so much, responsiveness to reality, right? You do something, the reality reacts to that, like it changes. And also like the dominant classes react in different way. Their allies change their position and your allies change position. And he's very attentive to that, right? And he's kind of constantly responding to reality. And I think, and that kind of like rapid adjustment and being adaptive to the current concrete situation at hand is, I think, will be part of our equation. And for that, you don't really need Lenin as a person or Leninism as a framework. But I think that kind of intuition and that kind of habit of being responsive to reality will be, and as I say these things, like just maybe 30, 40 years after Lenin, Amilcar Cabral is saying exactly the same things in different words, right? I'm just making that reference because that's how the question came. But if somebody would say, like, how about Cabral? I would say exactly the same, being responsive. And I think that part is really, really interesting. And I'm saying this exactly because we think that this movement ecology approach can allow us that kind of responsiveness in very volatile and very ambiguous times of like where we are going. So this is my reaction.
Good. So I have more questions, but I'm also going to take advantage of the fact that we have some other reviewer here connected. So I'm going to share these questions. I'm going to ask Andrew Boyd, because I know you're connected, if you could share a little bit, because I think the questions that are coming go into that. I mean, there's a few debates that I enjoy about that book, but this is one of them. So as I was given the privilege of being moderating, I'm going to use it. So there's basically that idea is like, right, is it too late? Is it possible? Is it necessary to do so? And it's not just one of the answers, right? And also here, Ted Franklin is also saying like there is no precedent for organizing a worldwide revolution, changing the mode of production just about everything else in 10 years. So how do we propose to do that now? You know, how to be part of strategies that maximizes our opportunity in that time frame. But we also have Honor's question of like how to connect this time frame. So we're still with that thing. You know, is it possible? What's the time frame? With upcoming imperialist war, civil wars, and so forth? And how can we connect social movement, labor movement, applying this movement ecology method with the existing revolutionary movement, especially in the dependent or neo-colony country? Connect, I mean, to make them realize this urgency and these approaches, you know, and I allow myself to complete that question from Anur with also a bit of mine, which is like, you know, there's people trying to do the revolution every day of their lives. You know, like they're already on that thing. You know, so what can we do with that? So that's a bunch of questions. I'm not asking you, Andrew, to answer them,
Oh,
just to add on to to that task. So I'll give you the floor if you want to share some thoughts. I just don't want to push you through those questions, but the thread of ideas that you can share with us about the book and all those questions. Thank you, Andrew, for accepting to jump in.
no pressure. Sure. No, just want to say I'm really glad this book exists. I was glad to have read it in manuscript form on an airplane, mostly on an airplane from New York to Lisbon, and got to hang out with Mariana and Maximo folks in Lisbon, and that was wonderful. And was honored to be asked to write a blurb for the book, and which was shared earlier. So I'm a big fan of its boldness, and I think I'll just say that, you know, in the U.S., which is much more politically backwards compared to Western Europe in general, you know, capitalism, we couldn't even use the word capitalism in sort of any, you know, meaningful political circles or any sort of, you know, even adjacent to mainstream political circles. And that's really shifted, you know, with Occupy and other sort of, and the, you know, continuing crisis of capitalism. So it's sort of it's worth noting the ideological progress that we've been able to make on that in the last 15 years, say, and that a book like this could be received in my country and in sort of my social movements and embraced. That capitalism is on the table. Capitalism is seen without much argument as the engine of ecocide, and that it's even imaginable. Sort of or various kinds of post-capitalisms are even imaginable. So that's just worth a little bit of context there and a little bit of a thumbs up for the book. Blandine, you also said you like the daringness of the book. You like the that it's aiming for victory in a very and laying out an actual a roadmap, relatively a strategy, or at least a critique of what's not getting us to victory, and some very strong half answers what might get us to victory. So I also like that very much. But I think a lot of what's on a lot of people's minds, mine as well, and I think it's come up a little bit, is this deadline, is this time frame. If we had all the time in the world, then we would continue with our 200-year-old year struggle and pass the torch and make mistakes and have time to make mistakes and lessons and learn and hopefully achieve our victory, in decades or generations or whatever. But we don't. And so I think that's where that's why this book is necessary. And that's also what's so acute about our historical moment. We're one of the projects I have among several. I was contributed the Beautiful Trouble revolutionary, creative revolutionary toolbox to the world. That was one big project. But of late, it's been very much focused. The last decade of my work has been the climate, and maybe the last 5 years, the climate clock, which obviously is about the deadline. And right now, that clock reads 4.5 years till we've basically the algorithm, which came from Greta Thunberg and through Rockstrom, and folks who calculated carbon budgets and advised Angela Merkel on carbon budgets, et cetera, out of Berlin, is at 4.5 years. So that's the point at which we will have emitted enough carbon to lock in 1.5. So that's gives us a 2/3 chance of actually not of getting, that's based on the 2/3, not the 50% chance kind of thing. So it's all about risk tolerance in those numbers. But let's just say that's the number on the clock, 4.5 years. And everybody asks us, well, what happens when the clock gets to 0? And isn't it already too late? And haven't we already passed 1.5? And all of these kind of questions. And obviously we've fielded these for years. And one of our sort of talking points, if you will, in our responses is this is our best deadline. This is what we need to accomplish. This is what is necessary. So let us focus on that deadline and hold everybody to account. I think we have, generally a little bit more of a mainstream way we sort of talk about it rather than so hard-edged revolutionary responsibility. We're trying to still hold the bad actors, to account, and that kind of a left liberal framework. So I apologize for that, but that's sort of how we politically positioned ourselves as climate communicators, at least. And so what we say to people is that that's the goal we must focus on. But we will never run out of time to act in defense of people and the planet. We will never run out of time to fight for climate justice. We will never run out of time to work towards a better world, even if that is on a damaged planet, even if that is under somewhat extreme conditions of unraveling. Justice is still necessary, kindness, community building, strategy, revolutionary, activity, fighting the bad guys, and trying to build socialism, build whatever eco-socialism, let's just use that as a phrase, in whatever ways we can in the midst of semi-collapse. I mean, that's sort of my assumption that we're going to be dealing with that. So I guess that's the sort of framework I'm sort of bringing to this book. And I think I would like to ask if how you guys might answer, is it also true to say we will never run out of time to go all in? And, in general, what is the value of, and I think there is value, but what is the value of the all-in framework if it is, quote unquote, too late in one, however you want to understand that term, 1.5 too late, 2.0, 2.5, 3.0 too late, however you want to understand what qualitatively or quantitatively what too late means. So that's some thoughts and a question. How did I do, Blandine?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you for that. So I'll just remember everyone that you can raise your hand if you wanna ask your question or comments. And I'm still reading the chat, so I'm gonna add a few other questions before giving it back to Mariana and Sinan. So let's remember we had that question about time frame that just been perfectly put in context. We also have that question about, okay, what do we do with imperialist wars, civil wars, and other ongoing things that I don't need to name, you know what they are. How do we connect this movement ecology with existing revolutionary movements? We also have like other new questions. One is like, Toby, I understand that the book is theoretical and is calling us on to refocus our movement strategy approach. What do you think we as activists, hurlings, and members of the movements need to change in our everyday lives, apart from reading the book? Uh, so, how do how does that help to transition to revolution? Then we have Manuel who asks, I am as well still curious about what's to be done actually, what should we change as a movement, an organization, an individual? And the third one from Anne, have you come across the idea of the collapse of everything? In this context, it could be argued, why kick against hold when we can build the new in the old? Found an example which I feel does both in Italy. Ex-GKN factory workers turned the struggle into just transition, really inspiring example. So figure change is going to be uneven, so we can learn from high points. Do not give examples like this. So with with all that, we need, what are the examples? How can we build from the old? What are the concrete change you're actually proposing? Sinan, Mariana, the floor is yours. You're gonna make me decide which one of you?
I can go first. There are so many different questions. I was just like trying to note them. That was my silence. Mm, I think like, well, let me maybe go back to that metaphor that Sinan used before of like the trunk. Do you remember? Like the trunk is like going down, like getting worse and worse, and then you need to stop it. And you kind of like, you might say that, well, when we crash, like to some place, maybe eventually, like maybe we're able to get out, like some of us will able to get out of that and, like try to build the car back again or something like that, who knows how that was going to be. But in that moment, I think that's not the question that we do to ourselves, right? It's like if you're on that car, like you're not just, maybe we can just let it, like we can just let it crash, and then eventually we will see how, like what happens. We will, like we will stop it, try to stop it as fast as we can. And then if that happens, then we will figure it out what to do after it, right? Like, but the point is not letting it crash. So I think like when we're talking about, oh, is it eventually going to be too late or something like, for me, it's a little bit like being in that car and saying, maybe we should, let's see what happens. Like why, like, so I think it's a little bit in that sense for me. And I guess like there is a part of this that I feel that sometimes we forget. Or like that it could be easier for us to connect with, at least for myself. When you know that we have like a clear deadline for doing, like for delivering this, at least we have to try, right? It's not like it's the same thing with the truck. At least we have to try to stop it, and like and we do our best. And if we're not able to do it, then we will see. But let's not just like look at each other and like and just wait. But there is so many questions that become really simple, because when we are, like when you're talking about like doing a task like this, you're going to ask yourself something like, is this the right moment? Am I able to do it? Like if maybe what I'm going to do is going to be worse than if nothing is done. Like these kind of things, all of them vanish because yes, it's the right moment. We have 5 years. Yes, it's you because you are alive now. Like it's not going to be worse than collapsing. So, like what are you talking about? Like so it's kind of there is so many things that usually, like stop us from acting that becomes like answer by itself by the context. And so that's something that I think like we should, like connect ourselves more with that and understanding, like it's not, you don't need to be perfect. You're alive now, you're able to do some things, then let's do it. Like so it's more around that and being able to, like get out of that place that we are, that is so numb. So that will be like one part of it. And yes, of course, if we crash, let's see what, like then who survives from the crash will definitely have the same values that we have before the crash, right? We will still fight for, like for social justice. So that's not we are debating. I'm just debating that most of us will crash. So let's try not to, like so that's one part of it. And there is another thing that I wanted to say before passing to Sinan maybe, and then I can grab again if something was not answered. There were some people saying, oh, maybe there are some people nowadays already working on urgency, like and trying to do revolution every day, or there are some people that some organizations that are doing, like part of, this somehow in different levels. And yes, it can be true, like what we are saying is that we need to actually be able to join these, right? So usually what is happening is that we have groups that are doing really amazing work in terms of system change and, like trying to stop capitalism working, but are lacking the notion of the timing and the deadlines. And then we have groups that are doing an amazing work in terms of urgency and bringing the urgency, but are, like, are not having the conversation about how do we execute system change. And we have groups that are doing an amazing work in terms of revolutionary work in their local, but they are not having a perspective of the global issue that we have, but it's going to be impossible to stop capitalism if it's just happening in one place and if it's not a global revolution, like a global change that is, articulated. So I think it's about how can we pick up what we already have been doing, changing, like the things that are not working and accepting that some parts that we are doing, it's not working, changing that and able to, like have a movement that is able to do a global change. And I think that's just to pick up some parts, because we're not saying that, like we are doing everything wrong or something like that, like, but we are saying that the way the perspective that we have, what is the deadline, what is the agreement that we have, we need to update that at least. Like we need to at least update them in some parts. There's some parts that need to be updated. And so to answer in terms of like there are some, how do we put the deadlines with some groups and stuff like that, I guess in the end is the conversation about, well, we have, you're saying that it's between socialism and barbarism, and we are in a present in a place where we have barbarism. We can see them with our eyes, like we can see that we're going to reach that. And you're saying that the only way for us to not reach that is through socialism. So now we have to do it, guys. So it's a little bit that, like that's the honest conversation that we need to have with the people that have that perspective already, but are not having like are not connecting with the context of living in a climate crisis. So yeah, so that will be like my 2 cents in that sense, and I'll pass to Sinan to add on.
Sinan, I don't know if you had a chance to like read some of the questions in the chat, but maybe you can try to to go forward with that, like remembering that there's two main issues that haven't been addressed yet, which is one, what are we doing with civil wars, imperialist wars? And then we have Stephanie from France who's like, well, capitalism is fighting back, we get repression. We have special, government labels some movement eco-terrorists. They created specific agency to watch, spy. What are we going to do with that? So maybe Sinan, you can go more in depth with that.
So I think there's one part which is kind of Mariana already said, and I'll just say it in different words. So there's a category of questions which are, so there was one question that like there is no precedent for that kind of structural change at the globe. There's no precedent for global change other than eventually one could call colonialism a global change, imposed global change. But like, okay, so there's no precedent for this kind of stuff that we wanted to do. The other thing is like, but there's the actual state of the movements in the world and how are we going to engage with them. And then there's another one which is like, okay, what are we supposed to actually do and stuff like that. So this is I take them as one category of questions which are spoiler-inducing questions. So it's very hard to answer them without actually going over the book itself. We have answers to that, but what I wanted to say here now is that these are actually, these are my actual frustrations. The questions that you're asking, these are our actual real life. They are corollaries to my to-do list, daily to-do list. Like it's in my notes, and it's like these questions and these frustrations and these confusions are direct corollaries. They're written in my notes. Like, okay, how am I going to do this with this union, or how am I going to do this with this NGO, or how am I going to do this with this particular political party? So, and it's not only national level, like at the international level. So this is really this is the part of the problem. This is the part of the question that we are trying to answer throughout the book, in our way. I just wanted to add one thing to what Andrew said when he mentioned the US context is a bit backwards in comparison to Western Europe in ideological terms and so on. Just wanted to add that Western Europe, like in my experience, has been quite backwards in ideological terms in comparison to, let's say, Asia. Have you ever heard of any activists from Philippines talk? Like they have full access to everything that I reached in 10 years, even though I am from Turkey. Like I wasn't really like part of the white European middle class, but like there's a lot of backwardness that is kind of part of where we're coming from. And I think it's interesting to kind of acknowledge that. And like, there's a lot to learn about like what is anti-imperialism when you talk to some activists from India, which is not at all what the left talk has dominated in Europe. So about all of this, like, what are we going to do about other things? So one, I guess there's a question about like what is the climate crisis here and like what is the deadline? What do we mean by that? And what if we passed it and so on? So there's a part of it that I wanted to react also, which is that all crisis is subjective by definition, right? All kinds of crises are subjective. But like, and this I mean in the sense of like, ask people in Sudan. That is an entire region of the world that we are now, so that is climate collapse live. You can just watch it happen. Climate collapse will happen that way. It will happen through civil war. It will happen through mass rape. It will happen. And it's not like in future when they cross the borders of like Europe, Fortress Europe or something. This is actually not like if you ask them, that is already like too late in a way. Like we passed several boundaries. It is not like deterministic at planetary level yet, which is what Mariana said. Like there are some physical boundaries that are not crossed, so we still have time. But you can also ask, like you can also listen to indigenous people from North America, like when did the collapse actually start and how did it start? Yeah, and then they would take you centuries back to say like this is more or less where you can trace it all back, and it's also true, right? So it's a bit of like situating what we mean by this deadline. However, typically, natural science doesn't give you proof of deadline in other kinds of situations of societal collapse. Like this is the novelty, that actually there is like hard evidence, let's say, that is like peer reviewed for the revolutionary hypothesis. So I think that is the novelty that we are kind of tapping into in what we are doing. And in general, it's important, like this is, I give these examples of Sudan, but I could give the example of Palestine. That's not very different. But like the whole point is that, so there's a question in the chat about like escalating violence. The escalating violence is happening. This is part of the collapse scenario, right? This is the collapse scenario. We are living in it and it's unfolding, right? So this is the management of the crisis. This is how they are handling the situation. This is not it's not arbitrary. It's not a historical accident. It is the way this is supposed to be going if we don't stop it. Like this is the capitalist scenario. Like when Mariana was saying like barbarism, or in the quote of, well, in the blurb of Andrew, but actually in the quote of Rosa Luxemburg, if this is the barbarism scenario, this is how this is how we expect it to go. And this is what we are trying to stop. So the civil wars, or like authoritarian regimes, are part of the deal. That's part of the scenario in which we are, and that is exactly what we want to that we want to handle. And there's a part of the book about like movement capabilities, like how can we be more resilient to that kind of scenarios and so on. But there's a lot of work that is beyond our book, and better people, like more intelligent people, did that kind of work, and it's part of the sixth chapter, which is not in the book, which is on the website, where we will be exploring this with contributions from other people.
Thanks. And actually, yeah. So we're gonna keep on for like about 10 minutes in the Q&A and comments. And then after actually, Sinan, I'm gonna ask you to get us a bit through that sixth chapter that I've been announcing at the beginning, kind of as a conclusion. There's more, like conversation is keeping up in the chat. I see that you're not into raising your hand, so I'm gonna keep reading. Sorry for that. Um, so there's a question from Levent about our definition of a climate crisis, and according to that answer, the question is, so why do we talk about climate urgency and not ecological urgency? And actually, Mariana knows, but it's something I share because I mean, we know the issue is not just climate. We know the depth of a crisis is huge. Also, I wanted to quote something from Mariana from a previous conversation. We were here in Colombia, getting all round up around. We wanted to boycott COP16, but then the leftist government was organizing it, so we kind of had to go, basically. And in a prep event we had, Mariana shared, like this is crazy how, now they do the COP in Latin America in order to, revamp and give like legitimacy again to a process that was delegitimized, right? So they do it in leftist or progressive, or however we call them, because leftist, we're not very leftist governments, or in authoritarian government, where people cannot mobilize. So I wanted to share that about that issue. And then we have more question coming in, like how do we get to the public, how do we get people on board for revolutionary change, right? I think one of the things you were saying, Mariana, was that emergency is also to make people believe that it's actually possible to change things, that things can be different. Maybe that's the feeling of emergency you were exploring earlier. And then there's a question from Manuel, uh, who's actually saying like, "Hey, sorry guys, but we need more on what to do." And there's another question about don't we to focus on the biodiversity cups instead of climate cups, but that was a joke. Sorry. So that's me, that's your moderator improvising, reading the chat that includes jokes. So I don't know, Mariana, Sinan. Oh, there's a raised hands finally. So Pedro Macedo, I will give you the floor for your question or comments.
Thank you. And congratulations to Sinan and Mariana for the book that I haven't read yet. So my questions are two questions will be first, who do you think will be the main change makers or catalyzers of this needed revolution? Let's call it like that. Who will be the most important ones? And if you think this change can be something translocal more than globalization of a new policies.
Thank you. And I think there was a Manuel also who wanted to maybe ask the question out loud.
Okay. Yeah, I can just say what I wrote. I mean, I have to say I read the book already, so I know more or less, but I would like to, everyone to hear what we should actually do differently, concretely. I mean, there's at least a few things in there. Yeah, and I didn't really hear them yet. So I think it would be good to hear them. That's it. That's everything.
Good, thank you. Well, actually, I mean, it was proposed for the end, but I would ask you, Sinan, maybe you can do that part in which you get us through that sixth chapter. Basically, if you go on the web page, uh, all in dot now, you're gonna find out that the beginning of that sixth chapter that we're invited to actually write all together. So maybe, Sinan, you can share that, see how to link it to the other question, and we can go from there.
Sure. So I think so it's like what was part of my previous answer. Like there's a lot of spoilers we can do, and we were kind of like, okay, there's a sequence of way of approaching it. Like, okay, what I can say, what I can't say, or like can as in would it make sense before saying everything else that is in the book and so on. So the book is designed in 6 chapters and 6 propositions, and it goes over each one of them. And then there's an implementation at the end of the book, which goes over each proposition and tells you like, okay, now what? And that is the end of the 5th chapter, because those are still, as I think it was Toby saying, that was like it's still relatively abstract. It's using organization terms, movement level strategy, and so on. And there are practical things that we need to do in real life. How do we reach people? How do we mobilize? What touches people? What are we going to do in this specific context? What are we going to do in this specific movement sub ecosystem? And all of those questions. And of course, there's a lot of organizing tools. I mean, it would be really a shame for me to talk about those things when there's Andrew Boyd who edited or collaborated in The Beautiful Trouble and so on. So there's a part of it that we don't want to say, but we are just so basically we proposed ourselves a 6th chapter, which is a compilation of good work that was already done by people that are more intelligent than us, more experienced than us, and so on. So the point here that I'm trying to make is that the book is really the core argument that we need to move forward. It itself has a to-do list and then has further steps. So basically, we have this website, which is all-in.now. And there you will see that first we are having other launch events, there are book reviews and interviews and stuff like that going on. And then there are 2 sets of chapters inside the website that is showing up. One is the 6th chapter, like exactly how to do what to do. And then there is the application articles that are coming up about how the ideas or the main tools in the book are implemented in real life or how they could be implemented. So some sort of scenario planning, but also learning from history kind of stuff. So there's also that kind of stuff coming up. And those are content that is not us writing. We are like other people around us that we were in contact with, they're writing those things. And together with them, we'll be also exploring the content of the book with other speakers in a series of webinars. So as I said, there are like six propositions. So per proposition, we will have a webinar from here onwards to the future. And in parallel to that, we will also be holding debates, workshops, trainings in whatever context that makes sense to apply these main tools that we compiled in the book. So those will be in person, online, mixed group, closed doors, open to public, all that kind of stuff. So I think the main thing that I'm trying to say here is that the newsletter of the website is actually helpful. You can get new information. I'm sorry. You can get new information from there. But also, sorry, I'll give it to Mariana. Well,
These kind of things happen with important issues. Mariana, did you wanted to add something on that?
Um, sure. Yeah, so picking up the Manuel message, um, I think like so we try to be in the book as clear as possible of what like the things that are necessary to done in terms of more like strategy and organizational for the next steps. And I guess that it's after you read the book, you can come to a point where you're like, okay, how am I doing this, right? Like me, myself. And one of the things that we are saying is the book is like, this is not able, you're not able to do this as an individual, right? You kind of need to do this as like an organization or like a group or like with other people, like sitting down. So I will say that like the first steps will be around that. And like there is a lot of tools in that sense, but mainly it will be like, so we are today in a book presentation, right? And we are supposing that a lot of the people that are here have not read the book, but we are able and we want to gather the people that read the book and that have questions about it, of how we are going to actually do the things and talk with each other and are able to navigate on those tools, right? So like to answer a little bit with Manuel, that maybe like that's where you are and that's what you are asking, and I do understand that. But the rest of the people need to read first the book first to be able to have that conversation. So I will say that. But just adding that I will be in Vienna in 10 days more or less for the People's Conference, People's Platform Conference, and I will also do an event in Vienna, so we can also talk where I'm there, and it's just 10 days, and then we we have that conversation.
Maybe just to make sure, can people access the book right now? I mean, this is the book launch, right? How can people access the book if they want to read it?
Sure, the book is already online, so you can
Great.
in the website you
Yeah,
can
we
find
just put it
the
on the
link
chat.
to the link to buy it. You have in ebook format. You can also order for your home in a printed format. So as you want to. Yeah, so you should be able to do it everything now.
Great. But because I love trailers and I love spoilers, I'm pretty sensitive to Manuel's comment about give me more. So I'm gonna do it. I know you don't, but I'm not gonna give too much. But I just want to say that actually the book is gonna get through an historical part that I think it does a great job at being really short and sweet, at saying like, okay, Paris Commune, what was their way of organizing? Okay, great. What did happen as a century after that? Okay, what happened with the Zapatista? How was that planning? What happened? What's happening in Rojava? So it gives you a few of those examples. As Mariana was saying, it's not getting into details about why climate crisis, fucked up environment. Like we all know that if we get close to that book. I mean, this is not a book to share to a friend who you wanna, who you wanna them to get aware of what's going on. It's a book for people who are aware and who are looking for the debate about how to strategize, right? Then when they get into the propositions, um, it's generally a step-by-step debate on some of the issues that were talked about today, right? I think one of the main debate is timeline and is it possible or not. We know that huge part of the left nowadays think that actually this is not time for revolution. We need to wait. Let's try a bit of social democracy on that side. Let's try a bit of this, a bit of that, and then we'll see. Other people think that the multipolar struggle between the blocs and the fact that China and US is gonna fight for the power is actually gonna save us all. Others just think it might be an opportunity, but not so much. So basically, the book is about what to do. Also, a big spoiler: it won't give you a straight answer. There's bold statement in it that are really nice to get into the debate, to get your head around it if it's something that you're interested in. but it won't tell you, what to do step by step, because we actually need to build it together. For me, it also asked important question about cohesion and unity, because usually I'm part of a big social movement here in Colombia. We talk about unity all the time. But the thing with unity, it's usually, you should unite around me. I have a proposal, let's build unity around me. So how can we get, overcome that? So I think there's many other questions that goes around. I think the time of the book is really good, because I do think this is the kind of debate that I see around here in Latin America. You can see it in several platforms, like political reviews. Like, this is an ongoing debate, and also the what if we're too late, that I do have to tell you now that I do share. The first thing I say the first time I heard specifically Mariana and Alice talk about, the war that capitalism is doing against us and climate and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, let's do it. But I really hope that if we don't, get socialism by 2030, you're not going to burn out, and we're going to keep on fighting. So, if that's a deal, let's go together, right? So yeah, I just wanted to share a little bit more about the book, because I felt that eagerness for knowing more, and I'm that kind of person. So I was sensitive to it. And I'm sorry I got excited, so I spoke really too fast. I tried not to do that before. Sorry to my fellow interpreters. I love you guys. Thank you for that amazing job. I'd like to I'm going to start to be thanking people and kind of saying bye. A few people are leaving, but we still have a few minutes. So I want to thank Danielle and Pierre-Yves in the French interpretation, amazing people doing volunteer work today, and the Polyphona team, which, by the way, is also my co-op of interpreters, Ari and Selene in Spanish. And I'd like to give the floor back to Mariana and Sinan for those last comment and pitch of what's coming next, and what did you thought about the first book launch?
So maybe I'll start first, and if I lose my voice again, then it's Mariana finalizing it. So I think one thing I wanted to say that I couldn't say just last time is like what to do is really just there's a part of the book that is implementation that you should do with your organization or the organizers around you or your group or a collective or several groups together, and maybe you can talk to us and then we can facilitate some of that work. So that's the part that needs to be done, right? The people coming together and like what's to be done. Everything needs doing. So many things that need to be done. So I think it's kind of talk to us. I think that is one of the points. Like there's all these things that are coming up that we have already been setting the webinars, the in-person events and so on. Talk to us and we will follow up through what we can do together. So that's one thing I wanted to say. And another thing I wanted to say is really, so some people are asking like practical questions about the book. Just so you know, this is self-published book, and our internal agreement was that we would get €1 per book in any format. So that is what is at stake. So there's no way we are recovering financially from the investment that was done through the book. So it's not about, we don't have any copies on our own unless we also buy from the website. So just so you know that there's also that bit of so the book is available online, ebook, and currently as paperback. Eventually we can have also hardcover. And you can reach it directly from the website of allin.now. And I'll pass to Mariana for final words.
Yeah, so maybe just adding to the adding to the logistical informations around the book, in terms of the platforms, because somebody was saying about the shipping. So by the website, you can find the most direct platform to buy it from, but it's also available in other major general platforms, like I don't know. It will really depend. Maybe you can just search in your country, which like I don't know if it's in Amazon or something like that. But there is in some places that they have that on those platforms. We are not sending people to those links because like it's they are shitty organizations, but maybe you can find the book there, and it could be easier for some countries to have that. So yeah, so just for you to know that, but the platform that we are using, well, it's not any of those big distributions, so it's also like easier for some people. You can use that one, but it will depend of like shipping, and I do understand that part. And in terms of like the translations, we have in English now. We are more than happy to translate to other language. So if you know other, like places that could make sense to translate, and if you have any suggestions of like publishers that could do that, feel free to also send us an email about that, because I saw some people asking, but currently it's only in English. We will try to have in other language also in the future, and. And if you feel like this event made sense for you, and you like to, like to invite more people to come to an event like this, you can also send us an email, and we can organize like a book launch event, or book presentation event in your place. It can be online or offline. Just like you can. We are more than happy to do that, and not only to do the book presentation, but also to do other debates and conversations, as Manuel was saying, like, okay, but actually what we do, right? So then you can also like send us an email, and we can set those kind of events. So we are more than happy to do that, because as we said, the book is not the book in itself, is a tool for us to be able to work together. So we hope that that's possible, and that this is the beginning of that. And thank you, Blandine, for being an amazing host for us, and for being here, and all the invisible people that were doing tech support and making sure that this goes smoothly as possible to everybody.
Yeah, I really want to thank the tech team. Thank again the interpreter. Thank you guys, and thank you for giving me the opportunity of having fun in that first step of of a trip that I hope will bring you here to Latin America, and we can keep on the debate, and please. If you enjoyed it, I understand the recording is going to be at some point available on the website and on the platforms. You can share it to the people who wanted to assist, but also I understand you can organize your own events to debate, and the others are there available for that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're going to try to keep on time because we know everybody's busy and have many things to do to change the world. So please keep up with the good job, and see you soon in next debates, talks, and so forth. Bye,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.